I think it's focusing on things which are causing pain points for your team or your customers. Seeing how you ranked for, used cars in genAI, you're not really going to do anything with it. But I would say to look to see whether there's misinformation, false information, or potentially illegal content where the genAI results have given consumers advice on how to incorrectly use a product that may lead to serious harm or death. Hi, this is David Iwanow, and this is SEO in 2026 Additional Insights Edition.
David, what's your number one SEO tip for 2026?
I think the key thing is to stop trying to track genAI results the same as you used to track traditional keywords. I see a lot of people talking on LinkedIn, and they want to take 100,000 keywords, which have been tracking in traditional rank tracking tools, and then drop it into their new genAI trackers.
So shall we start at the beginning by asking you to define genAI?
I mean, we have the AIO, GO stuff. I mean, it's a kind of a joke around as AEIOU. Old MacDonald had a farm. But I think it's very much kind of anything that is maybe more advanced than traditional search results. We could even look back to things like rich snippets and feature snippets. They were some of the early sort of genAI results. I think what we're seeing now is maybe a bit more of aggressive takeover in terms of, the Google AI sort of overview, and then they have the deep AI mode. But we are seeing, I guess, a lot of people starting to test various other platforms, whether it's ChatGPT for answering some of those questions, and then comparing them against sort of Google. So yeah, I would say the genAI results are just the more advanced summaries.
And you say that people were making a mistake by trying to track this in the same way that they do more traditional SEO. So what kind of mistakes are people making, and why is this a mistake?
I mean, I think, as I said, looking at what people share on LinkedIn around this topic, it's very much people are taking what they used to track and dropping into some of these genAI trackers. And typically, a lot of these genAI trackers are more expensive. They can't track as much and they can't track as frequently. So, an example, if you're a used car dealership, you would take your used car keyword and drop it into the rank tracking tools and see, how are we ranking for the genAI results around used car. I think very much people need to fundamentally review which are the types of keywords they really need to track, and maybe be a bit more selective in trying to, instead of track the whole entire keyword universe, they just track a handful of more specific keywords related to their business and also areas of maybe concern.
And how do you know the keywords that you need to track in the new world of AI?
I mean, that's the tough thing. So Bing has obviously rolled out its AI insights within Bing Webmaster Tools. But one thing I do see is there's a lot of, it feels very much like tracking voice search. There's a lot of just unknown, people are tracking things for the sake of tracking it. There's a few tools that try to estimate, the amount of searches and stuff. But I would say typically focusing on, the core topics that used to drive a lot of traffic in terms of traditional search, there's a fairly good chance that those are similar terms within genAI.
Okay, so not too different necessarily for keywords, but what about the content itself? How do you change the way that you produce content in order to optimize for genAI?
So I think there's a lot of people trying to take shortcuts. They've started doing listicles and stuff, and there's some programmatic or PSEO platforms out there who've tried to, spam Google with tens of thousands of pages. The one thing is there is some penalties that have been going out over the last couple of weeks, last couple of months. So a lot of people were taking shortcuts and just producing low quality garbage content to sort of fill the gaps. It's kind of coming back to bite them a bit.
Okay, so what's the difference then between low quality content and high quality content? Is high quality content original content, or can you use AI to collate content to assist with the production of content?
So I would say very much think about, the old school kind of buzzwords like the 10x. So take existing content that's maybe outdated, it's not maybe written by the most authority, and make amazing content. So it's not guaranteed that you're going to rank automatically, but if you are creating content, make sure it is good. So if humans do actually find it, it does actually add value. So, again, it sounds very much kind of like, people say you're a Google lackey by saying some of these things, but fundamentally, if you're producing good content, it should be good enough you share with your friends or family, If the content's not the quality that you would actually publicly put your name to or share with your friends and family, maybe you shouldn't be investing resources in creating that content. So, it's about getting subject matter experts and it's about doubling down. So if I was to write content around trips to Antarctica, maybe I'm not the best person to do this. But if I was to write content around traveling around the Netherlands or Europe, a little bit better place to do that because I live in Europe. So I think it's generally trying to not go too far outside your sphere of influence. I would still say there's a huge opportunity for hiring, journalists and subject matter experts and creating good content, because again, you can take that and you can also share it on social media. You can transfer that content into video content, which is doing really, really well. And I think that's my core thing that annoys me the most. The downside of genAI, with tools like ChatGPT and stuff, it allows content to be created that no writer would ever want to write. So I could write, the best spatula for serving lasagna. No content writer is ever going to say, yep, that's a great article, let's go ahead with this. So I think that's the downside to a lot of these GenAI tools. It allows really, really subpar topics that no one cares about to be written about.
You say video content is doing really, really well. What kind of video content, what platform, and how do you know if you should be publishing video content?
So you look across some of the channels for video content. YouTube is still probably the biggest second search engine in the world. You've also got TikTok, you've got Instagram. So there's a lot of demand from consumers seeking video content. And I think the type of content that makes sense, it's the type of content you can be a storyteller. So if an example like, how to pick a rug, maybe that's not the best video content. How to correctly lay tile floor, because I'm currently doing some renovation. That is amazing video content, because if you read an article, you can't really get your head around it. Versus if you actually see someone doing an activity, you can really visualize what steps they go through. So I think it kind of makes sense to, maybe GenAI can help with some of these things, doing quick, easy visualizations to see which content makes sense. But I would say anything that's slightly difficult or slightly nuanced, video content works quite well for them.
How much content is enough? Because you see brands that are publishing maybe one blog article a month or something like that, and there's so much content that, partly because of AI, can be published nowadays. And you alluded to the fact that it's not necessarily predictable whether or not a piece of content is to be a success. Is it just a case of publishing as much as possible, as often as possible? Or when do you know enough is enough when you're publishing?
Well, I think you should be able to track some terms of feedback metrics from search engines. What percentage of your content which you're publishing is getting indexed or discovered, and what percentage of your content is getting traffic. So if you kind of get to that tipping point where majority of your new content is no longer being indexed or discovered by search engines, or is not getting traffic, that's probably where it is. So one of the things I've seen in the past, and it sometimes doesn't come down to, how much content has been produced, it's the effort that was taken. So examples in the past, I worked looking across around 800 websites. And some of the websites, the content was great. And they had 5 or 6 really good looking guides in terms of the metrics. They had a lot of time on site. They led to conversions and all these types of things. Other sites had hundreds of pieces of content that no one ever visited. So I think there is some aspect of using a bit of time and effort to looking at your existing content, which doesn't make sense anymore, but also looking to see some of your content that can probably do with a bit of a refresh. So there's no kind of perfect number that you have to produce 300 articles a day. Again, depends on the size of your site. If you're New York Times, you can produce 300 articles a day and Google won't blink. If you're Dave's travel blog and I produce 300 or 400 pieces of content a day, Google's probably going to nuke my site pretty quickly.
You also suggest to focus on the things that are either hurting your brand or hurting your revenue. How do you define those things?
So it's one of those types of areas that I've talked a lot about in the past. You basically have, you could call Dr. Google. So people go to Google when they have problems or pains, and they basically want to see if they can do self-help remedies before going elsewhere. But also, if you're looking, let's say you saw an Instagram ad for, here's a really great knife sharpener. Okay, great. So I'm going to go online. I'm going to find a little bit about the company. I'll look at your Trustpilot reviews. Is this a legitimate company? So you often will find sometimes Google gets it wrong, or even ChatGPT as well, that its sources, maybe it's a troll on Reddit who talks about putting glue on your pizza. So I think it's very much you want to look for, the standard types of stuff about, reviews, is your company legitimate, refund policies. And you'll find a lot of the times is most sites don't have many of these pages. They don't have histories of the company. They don't know who are the founders. They don't have any information about shipping. They don't have any information about complaints. So the problem is how these sort of Gen AI tools work is they fill in the gaps. So they will find a source that answers the question, which may or not be positive, for what you're trying to do. You may have a really great return policy, but because some YouTube influencer said something terrible a couple of years ago, that is now the result that shows up in Google. So I think it's very much kind of looking to see what particular topics about, how much is too much. So, example, can I bathe in vodka? And you go into Google, no, you shouldn't. You definitely should not bathe in vodka. But if you look at the first organic result, it's for Quora, where some random person has said, yeah, actually you can bathe in a tub of vodka. It's probably not advised, but yeah, you can do it. You might be a bit itchy. And that's the problem. You get those types of results, and these things feed into the Gen AI results, which can put you in a very precarious position, because if you're a corporate SEO, before you put any content on the website, it needs to be approved by legal, regulatory, safety teams, brand teams. But the problem is the Gen AI results don't have that filter. So if you don't have that content on your website, these Gen AI results will actually try and fill in the blanks.
I think that many brands can see the value in what you're suggesting there, and ensuring that they have got more reviews, more case studies, that they have a nicer story that represents positive aspects about what they offer to AI. But it's hard to measure the value of that, isn't it? It's hard to prioritize that because you don't necessarily know what impacts it's having. How do you actually go about measuring the ROI of doing that?
So one of the ways I've done several times in the past is we've worked with customer service teams. So, if you're a larger business and you've got a customer service team or you've got a complaints department, you can see what types of common things are coming to their call logs. So say, for example, 30-40% of all your inquiries is how to reset your password. And then you go to the website and you have no page about how to reset your password. So you can create that simple content, and you can use a proxy metric of the amount of calls and the amount of email inquiries that had to be answered by someone in the marketing team, how many were saved by having that page capture a lot of that traffic. And some of the projects I've worked on, businesses estimate to save hundreds of thousands, even not millions, by just adding one or two pages of content. And then also mining your Trustpilot reviews or your Google Maps reviews. What are common topics people complaining about? What are the common issues they have with purchasing or buying from your company? So I would say look at those types of ones, create some great content around those topics, and use that as a proxy metric. The amount of people who go to that page, that equates to a saving where they would have emailed or contacted your customer service team.
And how do you incorporate all of this into an ongoing content marketing strategy? And how do you persuade other marketing teams to work with you on this?
So it can be a bit of a tough one. It depends on how much of a pain point it is for particular teams. So if you have a customer service team with 200 or 300 people, and you speak to them and they're really annoyed, they get all these inquiries about how to reset a password or how to verify their account, you can do a simple check. And again, it's not going to drive huge amounts of traffic volume, but it will save the company money. It will improve the trust and authenticity of the company, because people will be able to answer their questions at any time of the day. They don't have to wait for your call center to open. And then I think from there, you kind of look to expand it, such as, okay, so that we know there's a lot of pain points around, let's say you sell glue. So, is your product suitable for tiles? So you can start to see what are the common questions people are having, and then use that to create sort of product-led content, which ideally should drive more product sales in the longer term.
David, what's the key takeaway from the tip you shared today?
I think it's focusing on the things which are causing pain points for your team or your customers. Seeing how you ranked for, used cars in Gen AI, you're not really going to do anything with it. But I would say to look to see whether there's misinformation, false information, or potentially illegal content where the genAI results have given consumers advice on how to incorrectly use a product that may lead to serious harm or death.
David Iwanow is marketer at The Lost Agency. Find out more over at davidiwanow.com. David, thanks so much for being part of SEO in 2026.
Thank you very much. Bye.
I've been your host, David Bain. Get your copy of SEO in 2026, the book, over at seoin2026.com.